On behalf of the boards of directors and advisors and the King family, we wish to express our thanks and appreciation to each and every one of you throughout the nation and indeed throughout the world for your continuous support over the years in the efforts of the King Center to keep the dream alive. We also wish to commend those of you not only in Atlanta but throughout the 50 states who are involved in participating and organizing birthday celebration events, especially those that focus on solutions to the rampant crime and violence sweeping our nation. We're especially appreciative of and commend those elected officials like our own Mayor Campbell and Governor Miller, who's made a high priority for their administrations with action programs to halt the violence and crime in their states and in our city. Down through the years, God has blessed us with dreamers. The Bible tells us of dreamers, and among the most conspicuous was Joseph. On April 8, 1968, 4 days after the assassination of Martin Luther King, Jr., and the day before his burial, Coretta Scott King, one of God's dreamers, a visionary, put forth to the nation and to the world, but most importantly to those of us who knew, loved, and worked with Dr. King, the challenge that his spirit never die and that we go forward from this experience, she said, that we must carry on. With that statement, Mrs. King, a dreamer, a visionary, our founding president, moved beyond the grief and devastation of the time and set in motion the establishment of the King Center, keeping the dream alive by addressing the triple evils of poverty, racism, and violence. It is my honor to present to you a dreamer, a visionary, and a world-beloved, for a world-beloved community, a visionary for the power of nonviolence, a visionary for love and peace. The founding president and chief executive of the King Center, who dares to dream, Coretta Scott King.
Thank you, Chairman Jesse Hill, Jr., for your generous introduction. Congressman Lewis and Congressman Stokes, Secretary Shalala, Governor Miller, Mayor Campbell, Mrs. Tombo, Ambassador Young, Mrs. Farris, members of the clergy, distinguished guests. It is a great pleasure and an honor to share this day with all of you. Dr. Roberts, I want to especially thank you and all of the members of Ebenezer for hosting this beautiful service of commemoration marking the 9th annual Martin Luther King holiday. This year, we mark the holiday with an urgent concern about the tidal wave of violence that has engulfed our nation. With all of the assaults and rapes, homicides, drive-by shootings, armed robberies, kidnappings, carjackings, spouse and child abuse, our cities and towns have become war zones. Hospital emergency rooms now treat 3 times as many gunshot wounds as they did 6 years ago. There is an arms race within America that is direct and immediate threat to our national security. What we are facing is a national emergency that is destroying the soul of America and our hopes for the future. Yet, amid all of this suffering and tragedy, I bring you a message of hope today. The American people are beginning to rise up. All across the nation, people are starting to demand action to stop the violence. This uprising against violence has already won impressive victories few thought possible when we met here last year. The passage of the Brady Bill was a significant first step toward getting some sanity in our handgun policy. The Centers for Disease Control has declared that violence is a leading public health issue. A new anti-crime legislative package includes $400 million for anti-crime programs. From the Atlantic to the Pacific, communities in crises have begun to organize citizens' patrols, anti-drug hotlines, and gun turn-in programs, such as the pioneering effort being conducted here by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Conflict resolution programs are springing up in schools and the workplaces. Even more encouraging, the news media and political leaders have begun to earnestly examine the systemic injustices of poverty, deprivation, and exploitation, which contribute to destructive violence in our society. All of these efforts, and many, many more, are needed to end the bloodshed in our communities. Somehow, millions of America's young people have lost their faith and their self-esteem. We can blame the demoralizing effects of poverty and the destabilizing of families that so often goes with it. We can blame the seductive culture of materialism that leaves so many young people feeling shallow and empty. But let us be clear. Poverty and systemic injustice are never justification for violence and brutality. No injustice, no matter how great, can excuse even a single act of violence against another human being. If you are driving on a wet and slippery road, that's no excuse to drive recklessly. On the contrary, you have a moral obligation to drive even more carefully. In the same way, we have a moral obligation to challenge poverty, racism, systemic injustice with a carefully thought out plan of action, and let it be nonviolent action. Poverty and injustice can never excuse violence, and violence must never be accepted as an excuse for tolerating poverty and injustice. There are many causes of the explosion of youth violence, but I feel strongly that the root cause is spiritual and moral decay. Wherever you find violence, you find people who have lost their spiritual bearings. We have to keep working for a more just society, but we can't afford to wait for the day when it finally becomes a reality, because we are losing too many young people to the war in our streets. We have to restore faith in God, faith in the power within us to change and make a positive difference in our lives and the world. We have to find truth and meaning and a sense of our own spark of the divine. We have to set an irresistible example of decency and truthful living for young people so they will be strong enough to resist violence and poverty and materialism. If we dare to call ourselves followers of Martin Luther King Jr., if we dare to be worthy of the dream, now is the time to follow the rhetoric of concern with the force of action. We have to do more, much more, to provide young people with a moral education and a spiritual foundation that will empower them to resist this culture of violence. This is the meaning of the 1994 birthday theme, Nonviolence, Empowering to Make a Difference. Our more than 30 King Week events and programs, all the King Center's programs and projects are designed for just this purpose. We have to teach young people about the importance of personal responsibility, that life has moral obligations as well as privileges. With more and more homes broken or headed by a single parent, we have to organize more mentoring and big brother and sister programs to give young people every opportunity to get the moral and spiritual guidance that will empower them to become productive citizens and decent parents. It's time for us to demand that public schools become partners in moral development. We are not asking that they get involved in the religious controversy or engaged in church and state conflict, but we insist that they create programs to teach young people that the same virtues that empowered Martin Luther King Jr., these virtues are honesty, tolerance for diversity, self-respect and respect for others, love, forgiveness, compassion, sharing, and most of all, the moral courage to resist peer group pressure and to stand up for what is right. We have to instill in American youth a passion for justice and peace and the strength to embrace the philosophy and strategies of nonviolence that Martin Luther King Jr. taught, preached, and lived. We have to teach them by example that nonviolence is the most revolutionary force for social and personal transformation ever applied. This is what we are about at the King Center, and we need your help more than ever to meet this challenge. We must also demand more from young people themselves. At this point, I want to take a moment to address the young people who are here with us today, as well as those who are watching on television. I ask all the young people of America to make Martin Luther King Jr. Day a day of service. Whether you are African American, Hispanic, or Native American, whether you are Caucasian or Asian American, you are part of the great American dream and Martin Luther King's dream for America. This is not a black holiday. It is a people's holiday. And it is the young people of all races and religions who hold the keys to the fulfillment of his dream. I know many of you are having a difficult time. No other generation in history has been challenged by temptations that have led to human destruction. It almost requires a heroic effort on your part to resist the drug pushers, to say no to guns, to say no to irresistible sex, to say no to greed and dishonesty, to say no to prejudice and hatred. The people who submit to these temptations may appear to be having fun, but they always end up feeling empty and lost and find themselves alienated. But those who resist evil find greater self-esteem and stronger character. Young people, don't let yourselves be used by the purveyors of violence and moral depravity. Make no deals with the devil. Make yourselves strong and righteous. Make yourselves drum majors for justice and peace and freedom. No one else can do that for you. There is no better way to honor Martin Luther King, Jr. How do you become a drum major? Start by getting fed up about drug pushers destroying your community. And decide to do something about it. You can begin by getting angry about violence in the media as well as in the streets, and decide not to support violent movies. Or music on television that is violent. You can start by getting fired up about the national disgrace of poverty and neglected children and organizing some action to reduce it. You can speak out against bigotry and hatred. You can channel your anger into a positive, creative, and powerful force for change. And the way you do this is to study the teachings of Martin Luther King, Jr. And after studying them, apply them with a vigorous spirit of determination. Remember that the most important tool for your empowerment is the force of your will. You have to decide that nobody is going to lead you to destruction, that you are going to be a person of high moral and spiritual standards. You have to decide that you are going to be a person who demands excellence from yourself as well as from others. Martin Luther King Jr. was not a physically large man. His strength did not come from his ability to hurt anyone. He never held political office. He never had a lot of money. Yet he was one of the most powerful leaders in this century. His power came from faith in God and love for all humankind, including his most violent and hate-filled adversaries. He was empowered by love, the greatest power of all, a power that cannot be taken away by threats, abuse, or violence. His love was so powerful that it is still the motivating force long after his death. That's why people in more than 100 countries are celebrating his birthday with a magnificent outpouring of love and service and healing. I call on you this holiday to say yes to the power of love. Say yes to nonviolence. So you will be encouraged and empowered to carry forward his unfinished work. Get involved in the nonviolent movement against injustice. Come out from the shadows of apathy and indifference. Young people, yours is the chosen generation, the generation which must lead a nonviolent revolution for a better world. America needs your contributions. We need your energy, your courage, and your creativity to create a truly great society. The King Center is here to provide you with training that can help you be more effective if you accept the challenge with courage, determination, and dedication. Some future historian will write that yours was the generation that fulfilled the dream of Martin Luther King, Jr. This is not an easy road to travel. There will be times when it seems unbearably difficult. When these times come, I hope you will remember these words from a sermon by Martin Luther King, Jr. He said, "I would urge you to give priority to the search for God. Allow His Spirit to permeate your being. Before the ship of your life reaches its last harbor, there will be long, drawn-out storms, howling and jostling winds, and tempestuous seas that make the heart stand still. Without God, all of our efforts turn to ashes and our sunrises to darkest nights. But with Him, we are able to rise from tension-packed valleys to the sublime heights of inner peace and find radiant stars of hope against the nocturnal bosom of life's most depressing nights." Building moral character is important, but I don't believe it is the only problem. We must also identify and challenge the external forces behind the epidemic violence. We must be aware of many factors: alcohol and drug abuse, handguns, unemployment, disintegrating families, inadequate educational opportunities, and media glorification of violence all contribute to pervasive alienation, despair, and hopelessness among young people. All of these problems are interconnected. All reinforce each other to create a destructive mix of conditions that make frustration, anger, and violence all but inevitable. Studies show that abuse of drugs and alcohol plays a part in the majority of all homicides. Simultaneous with this influx of drugs, there has been a huge increase in handgun violence. Since 1970, the number of guns circulating in America has more than doubled to over 200 million today, including 67 million handguns. Time magazine reports that about 100,000 students carry guns to school every day. To stop this war in our communities, we should support legislation that is being introduced in Congress to require further control on handguns and assault weapons. But as followers of Martin Luther King, Jr., we must never lose sight of the larger goal of domestic disarmament. We must remember that our charge is to create a society free from the threat of these deadly weapons, the nonviolent society Martin Luther King, Jr. envisioned and worked to achieve. In addition to the decline of family cohesiveness, the role of guns, drugs, and economic deprivation, we have to recognize that the saturation of American culture with violence has had devastating effect. I am encouraged that President Clinton has challenged the entertainment industry to promote a culture of nonviolence. Our films and television, music videos, and even video games for children have gone way too far in glorifying a sick, depraved subculture of violence. Dr. King expressed the prophetic concern about the growth of violence in entertainment. Back in 1963, he said, "By our readiness to allow arms to be purchased at will and fired at whim, by allowing our movie and television screens to teach our children that the hero is one who masters the art of shooting and the technique of killing, we have created an atmosphere in which violence and hatred have become popular pastimes. If this was a concern 30 years ago, it is a crisis today." A 1990 study of American films revealed that 1 out of every 8 Hollywood movies depict at least one rape. A survey of pre-teenagers done about the same time found that more of them could identify slasher film characters, Jason and Freddy, than could identify Martin Luther King Jr. or Abraham Lincoln. Young people often look to performing artists for moral guidance and inspiration, as well as entertainment. When these artists glorify guns, beatings, and contempt for women, they are injecting poison into the veins of America's future. I feel very strongly that there is an unspoken conspiracy between those who profit from violence, the gun and drug pushers, the producers of violent films, videos, and music. Even if they never speak to each other, they know that they need each other. They all depend on each other to reinforce and to promote a poisonous culture of violence for monetary gain. The profiteers are merchants of death. I consider their complicity to be a form of treason that we must not allow to go unchallenged. We have given them a free ride for too long, and the time has come for us to put an end to it. We have to create a great American coalition to take the profit out of violence. We must do everything in our power to overthrow their reign of death and destruction. We must become more aggressive lobbyists for anti-violence reforms in our federal, state, and local legislature bodies. We must become better organized consumers so we can launch boycotts against those who are subsidizing and profiting from the culture of violence. I have to say it again. We must take the profit out of violence. We have to press federal, state, and local governments, foundations, corporations, and other founding agencies to support those artists who promote a culture of nonviolence. We have to make sure that performing artists and producers of entertainment programs begin to take more responsibility for the consequences of their work. Today, let us declare an all-out campaign against this culture of violence and materialism, which is so ruthlessly undermining the values and institutions that bring meaning and decency to our society. This culture of violence demands condemnation and corrective action from everyone who believes in the dream of Martin Luther King Jr. Let this campaign begin. On this day, we honor America's great prophet of peace. Today, I call on the followers of Martin Luther King Jr. here in America and all over the world to observe a moratorium on violence. I ask adversaries who are engaged in personal as well as political conflicts to honor Martin Luther King Jr. on this day by reaching out to each other in a spirit of starting a constructive dialogue. Use this day to plant the seeds for a peaceful revolution or resolution of the divisive conflicts in the family, in the community, the nation, and the world. Let this moratorium signal a new beginning for America, a new beginning for America. Let this moratorium set an example of peace and healing and service to humanity. And if we can achieve just one day of peace and one day of service, then maybe we can achieve another and another and another. We have an historic opportunity for a great national healing if we will accept these challenges with courage and determination. I can see a great nation being reborn in justice and brotherhood. I see a new nation where every child is safe and secure from the mayhem of deadly weapons and the scourge of drugs. I see a nation that nurtures its children and protects their precious innocence with compassion and caring. I see a nation where every child is enrolled in a good school that has all of the resources needed to teach them to love learning. I see a nation where young people can get as much education as their minds can absorb, and a full range of cultural opportunities to enrich their spirits. I see a nation where families are once again restored to wholeness, where parents can find employment adequate to create a decent living for their children. I see a beloved community where children need look no further for positive role models than the faces of their mothers and fathers. We can bring this great vision into reality. We can put an end to epidemic drug abuse and create the beloved community that Martin Luther King Jr. envisioned if we work and pray and struggle together in the spirit of nonviolence. Martin Luther King Jr. often reminded us that the human family transcends race, religion, and national boundaries. His dream was not confined to America, but it is a global dream. This is why more than 100 nations commemorate his birthday in some way. They know that he had a vision of a worldwide beloved community where every child could have a decent life free from war and violence. In his book entitled, "Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community?" he challenged his followers to embrace a new revolution of values. A true revolution of values, he said, will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrasts of poverty and wealth and say, this is not just. A true revolution of values will lay hands on the New World Order and say of war, this way of settling differences cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. A genuine revolution of values, he said, means in the final analysis that our loyalties must become ecumenical rather than sectional. Every nation must now develop an overriding loyalty to mankind as a whole in order to reserve the best in their individual societies. We have seen how this philosophy and methods have been used to empower freedom struggles and peace movements all over the world. We are encouraged by the breakthroughs in peace talks between Israelis and Palestinians. We welcome the progress toward reconciliation of the Vatican and Israel, Northern Ireland and Great Britain, the United States and Vietnam. In South Africa, Nelson Mandela and President F.W. de Klerk have been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for negotiating an agreement for South Africa's transition from apartheid to non-racial democracy. The King Center has worked long and hard to help the South African people win their freedom, and many of you in this audience. We lobbied Congress for years to pass sanctions against apartheid. We picketed the embassy, and some of us went to jail against apartheid in our protests. And at this moment, very moment, King Center staff and board members are in South Africa helping with voter education projects in support of the first free elections in South Africa. Yet, we are also keenly aware of new threats to peace and stability. The unholy mix of ethnic violence and aggressive nationalism that is shattering hopes for peace in so many regions of our world. As followers of Martin Luther King Jr., we can't express concern about what is happening to the children of America and remain silent about the oppression of children around the world. We must find a way to do more to help the suffering children of strife-torn nations such as Haiti and Bosnia and the Horn of Africa. We have to demand international action to help the homeless children on the streets of the cities like Rio de Janeiro, the children who have been brutally enslaved in Bangladesh, sweatshops sold into prostitutions in Thailand. We have to support the relief agencies that serve these children and other development programs that can help sow the seeds of self-sufficiency throughout Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Eastern Europe. So what is the state of the dream today? My brothers and sisters, the dream is very much alive. And those people and places we are reaching through the King Center's nonviolence workshops, our community empowerment initiatives, our training of law enforcement officers, the mediation roles we've taken with street gangs, KingFest, the King Papers Project. We will continue to educate, to motivate, to mediate, and yes, even agitate when we need to. Until the dream has meaning for all of us, it cannot have full meaning for any of us. Help us to share the dream. Help us to reach wider, higher, further, deeper. Help us to touch all humanity. When this service concludes, we will begin to assemble downtown for a march commemorating the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. We will march today to signal a vigorous new era of nonviolent protest against poverty, racism, and violence. We call you to join our march for jobs and educational opportunities, for drug and gun-free zones in our schools, homes, and communities. Join our call for the moral and spiritual renewal of our society. Help us demand decent health care for everyone. Support our protest against child abuse and neglect. Work with us to ensure that every American has a decent home and food to eat. Express your support for the people of South Africa. Stand up for the war-ravaged children of Bosnia, Burundi, and the Middle East, and the millions of hungry children of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Rise up and help us take the profit out of violence. Have faith. Stand up and march on with a renewed sense of moral and spiritual empowerment. Rise up and march on with unstoppable courage for the dream of a world aglow with the blessings of peace and prosperity, where the human family can live together as brothers and sisters, a world where love, justice, and brotherhood will reign supreme. Keep the dream alive. God bless you.